business schools do not teach how to make an integrated set of choices that provide the guidance for everybody else in the organization.
Este podcast será el esperado encuentro entre la estrategia emergente y el play to win. Hablaremos con Roger Martin, tal vez el más importante pensador de estrategia del mundo hoy, y reconstruiremos con él las ideas que llevaron a play to win y que llevaron a la estrategia emergente desde el mismo origen intelectual, en la firma en la que trabajamos en Monitor en los 90s y desde las conexiones profundas con Mike Porter.
So, when Monitor was created, it was created really on the basis of competitive strategy. When Mike came up with competitive strategy, changed the world.
Roger Martin define, como lo hice yo en mi libro, que un verdadero choice tiene que tener contrario. Sin contrario no hay choice.
A choice is a strategy choice only if the opposite is not stupid on its face. If the opposite of your choice is stupid on its face, then everybody else will be making exactly the same choice. And
Roger nos muestra cómo el choice, además de posicionarlo a uno de forma única en el mercado, también tiene un efecto comunicador a los competidores de que se dediquen a otra cosa.
What you want to do is convince a competitor to...
Okay, hi everybody. I am so happy to have this podcast, this very expected podcast on my side, and I'm sure you guys are going to love it, the listeners and followers and practitioners of strategy in Latin America, of La Estrategia Emergente. Here we have no other than Roger Martin himself. I guess one of the best read authors, thinkers with a huge followership in Latin America. I can attest of that. We're going to have maybe 1 hour, a little bit of longer than that, of pure strategy conversation, Roger. So how are you? How are you feeling?
I'm great. It's nice to see you again. I remember fondly our lovely lunch in Fort Lauderdale about a year ago now, right?
Yeah, about 2 years, huh? I think.
Is it 2 years now? Gosh, time flies.
Time flies. Great, Roger. I guess we wanna have this conversation to be very intense and to take advantage of every second. So I guess my first question is very brutal. What is today your working definition of what a strategy is, and how has your vision and your definition of a strategy evolved over the years? You've had a very interesting career. I leave it up to you to merge those two themes. But we all know that the work defines you. So what would be Roger Martin's definition of a strategy, and how have you come up with that?
Sure. So my definition now is it's an integrated set of choices that positions you on a playing field of your choice in a way that you outperform anybody else on that playing field. Okay. So by outperform, I mean you have a better value equation, right? So the difference between what customers on that particular playing field are willing to pay you for your offering, the difference between that and what it costs you to produce that offering is bigger than for anybody else. Therefore, you can, if you're doing it right, you can continue to invest in serving those customers more than anybody can. And if you invest well, you continue to invest well, you will always stay ahead. And for that set of customers, you will be important to them. So that, and strategy is the set of choices that produces that outcome. Because strategy is choice. You make choices to do some things and not other things. And one thing that's evolved over time is I've come to this definition of what is a choice. So if strategy is, well, what is a choice? A choice is a strategy choice only if the opposite is not stupid on its face. If the opposite of your choice is stupid on its face, then everybody else will be making exactly the same choice, and it will not give you advantage. So if you say, our choice is to value our talent, okay, so as opposed to mistreat all our talent or fire all our talent, like, you know, the opposite is stupid.
Yeah.
And so it's not a real choice. A real choice may be, you know, we are willing to pay talent in this industry more than anybody else does, because we can make them more valuable than anybody else can, so we can afford to pay them more. That's a choice, because the opposite is not stupid. The opposite could be we seek to, or another choice could be we seek to have good talent, above the 50th percentile on average talent, and that's what our strategy is going to be based on. So that's a real strategy choice, as opposed to what I call an operating imperative. An operating imperative is something you simply have to do because the opposite is stupid. Like, you have to pay your taxes, you have to get your financial statements audited, you need to have a financial accounting system. You need to be nice to your customers, right? A whole bunch of things are operating imperatives,
Yeah.
but they don't rise to the level of strategy, which are choices that make you distinctive.
Great, Roger. Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, it's. I guess I'm going back to now. Now I'm learning that maybe those definitions come straight from you. I mean, back in the monitor years, we would talk about, even before Mike Porter's paper, we would talk about a set of integrated choices. We would, and maybe a lot of those things came from you.
That was indeed mine.
Yeah, I'm
right?
sure.
So,
and we will talk about many things that were really yours back then, and we'll talk about that hotbed of innovation back then. But yeah, I think I always tell people that, you know, the world these days, that, you know, apparently that paradigm has won. Still, people do and talk about a lot of pseudo choices. People deceive themselves with the idea that they chose and they didn't really choose anything.
Yes, I agree. I mean, I think, and Mike Porter, our friend, the great Mike Porter, always used to say that the dream of so many managers is to do exactly what everybody else is doing and have extraordinary results. Right? It's just a delusion. Mike would always say, you know, if you want to be extraordinary, you have to make a different set of choices. You can't do it. So I think he taught you and I both the importance of distinctiveness in your choices. And I take zero credit for that, because that was mine.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I mean, back in that launch we had, I learned that many of the things that you know, that enthused me and attracted me a lot about the ideas, even when I didn't really know the full implications, really came from you. I mean, we will talk about your product development side. You were a product developer in the consulting world, and it's interesting. But I want to stress for the audience.
And you know, do you want a little bit of the history?
Go ahead.
Of that?
I mean, I want you. I want to prod you into telling us a little bit of the making. I mean, how this became.
Well, it was desperate times call for desperate measures. So when Monitor was created, it was created really on the basis of competitive strategy. When Mike came up with competitive strategy, changed the world of strategy completely, seminal book, probably still the most important book ever written on strategy. He came out, and it was the first business bestseller. Before that, there was no such thing. There wasn't even a genre. Publishers didn't try to publish business books to make them like popular books. It opened up a category, because
he was the category founder in a way.
And then Good to Great and all these books, but before that, there was none. And so when he published it, all these executives read it and would phone him up and say, Mike, this really resonated with me, help me. And so Monitor Company was a product of Mike not wanting. Mike wanted, and always has been, a full-time academic. He always wanted to be that. So he didn't want to spend all his time doing that, even though he loved executives, he loved strategy. So Monitor was a response to all of that. But what people loved first and foremost about competitive strategy, the book, was the 5 forces analysis. They just loved the 5 forces. Executives glommed onto that immediately because it revealed all sorts of really cool things about, why does my industry work this way? Now I understand, thanks to Mike Porter. Okay, so and so in the early years of Monitor Company, we did mainly 5 forces analyses, right? We would say, we'll come in and analyze the 5 forces and do the analysis of the competition and substitutes and the buyer power and supply power, blah, 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 blah. And we'd say to the client, well, here's your industry structure, right? And here it is. And that was the base of our business. But the smart clients would sort of say, okay, that's nice, but you had this other thing in the book about you got to be low cost or differentiated, and you don't want to be stuck in the middle. How do you figure out how to be low cost or differentiated? And if you read Competitive Strategy, what you'll see, you should reread it, Alejandro, because you probably haven't for a while, because most people haven't, because it's a 45-year-old book now. It has no methodology for doing that. It just says you should do this, and it's really bad if you're stuck in the middle, right? That's basically all that it says, right? And so we had a problem at Monitor Company, which was the core original product, 5 forces analyses, was being shown to be kind of limited. It gave you insight, but it didn't give you strategy. And we didn't actually have a strategy process. We just didn't. And so I took it upon myself, and that realization.
It's such a beautiful,
Roger,
it's such a beautiful example itself of emergent strategy. I mean, you guys started doing something and then learned and ended up doing the strategy that we came to know. I think you have opened so many interesting fields that, we could just finish the hour doing that. I guess that maybe at the beginning of the 90s, Gary Hamel said that the dirty little secret of strategy was that there was no theory for strategy. I think we've come a long way. I think a lot of through your efforts and some other. Do we now have a theory of strategy? I myself think that a theory of strategy should answer coherently the what of a strategy with the how to of a strategy in an integrated way. I think. So what's your thinking about that? I mean, I think you have. I mean, if people ask me, I would say that you have a broad key ideas into that but I don't actually like methodologies myself. I like more philosophies and principles. But what are your opinion, your reflection, your thinking as to how we evolve? Do we have a theory of strategy? I mean, what you just mentioned is just.
I think we. Yeah, no. I think I like Gary, and Gary's a smart guy, and I think if he was saying that in the early '90s, he was kind of largely right. I would say from its inception, right, Boston Consulting Group, thanks to Bruce Henderson, and Bruce and Mike, I think, are the 2 most important figures in the history of
Bruce
strategy.
Henderson and Mike Porter,
Yeah. Peter Drucker's the most important thing in management, but in strategy, and BCG had kind of a theory of strategy based on Bruce Henderson. It literally was, the company with the greatest cumulative production will have the lowest cost. It should price ahead of its experience curve so that it always is producing more cumulative volume, which will mean its costs will forever be below its competitors, so it can make more money than competitors and always be number one. So that was the BCG theory from 1963 onward. So that was a theory of strategy, and the way you created a strategy was to figure out what your cumulative production was, map out the experience curve going forward, figuring out what you had to price to make sure that you sold more than your competitors. So now the problem, right, is that that's too narrow a theory.
Exactly.
Of strategies. So it worked for, I don't know, plate glass windows or gypsum wallboard or the like. But this is where Mike, in my view, supplied an incredibly important added dimension to the entire theory of strategy, if you will. He said, yep, you can do that. That's cost leadership. And by the way, there are other ways to be a cost leader than that, too, not just cumulative production, but yep, I buy that, but there's this other thing. In some industries, in some products, in some offerings, it's not like one sheet of gypsum wallboard is the same as the next and the next. Customers value and are willing to pay for special things that are unique to the product, and that I'm going to call differentiation. And so he had a theory of strategy, which it said you had to configure your activities to be the cost leader, or figure out enough about the customer to be able to deliver exceptional, unique quality to them that they value and pay for, and that's called differentiation. The problem at that point was, and so that was an enhancement of the BCG approach, right? But I give BCG lots of credit because they, Bruce Henderson founded the practice of strategy long before the academy did. Mike gave a more robust theory, if you will, but didn't provide how would you actually do that? How would you think your way from, let's say for sake of argument, as many of the executives who read the book call him up and say, Mike, we're demonstrably stuck in the middle. We aren't the cost leader or the differentiator. Help. What you then needed was a process of thought.
Exactly.
A set of principles, a set of steps that could get you from I don't like the strategy I currently have to I like the strategy I currently have. And I like it because if I compare it to what Mike says is a good strategy in competitive strategy, it looks like that. Hooray. And so I would say that if I were being harsh in assessment of Mike Porter's competitive strategy, even though I love the man and I think of him as one of the two greatest thinkers in history, it would be that it was more of an admonition. You ought to do this than a prescription. Here's how to do this. And that's the gap. For what it's worth, that is precisely the gap that I sought to fill, and I'm still seeking to fill it, to ever more refine that so it's easier, more readily for somebody who wants to. Lots of people don't want to have a strategy. Lots of people want, as Mike Porter said, to do what everybody else does and hope it succeeds. But for the people who want to do strategy, my goal is to make it easier and easier for them to be able to do that.
I coincide with you, Roger. So I mean, obviously there is a theory in evolution. Henderson, I agree with you. Even some things Henderson said are so timeless in a way. I'll just go to one of those in a minute.
Yes.
Even beyond Porter, I'm saying. I'm also, as you know, Monitor alumni, Porter, fan. You're a fan too. But yeah, I agree with the book. And just to give you an example of what you were saying, I joined Monitor and we had to work in these comparative advantage of nations projects back then in the 90s. You remember?
Yes,
you were one of the directors that sponsored those things back in Monitor. And we would have a lot of problem explaining to normal people that they were stuck in the middle, that they were facing a choice that they couldn't even see, even verbalize, and that was very hard.
Yes.
And I think part of the advantage is that, we were, away from headquarters and we had to do something. And we started exploring things that I also learned that you did also at the beginning of your career at Monitor. I mean, you started these conversations, these open-ended conversations. You would teach clients to think and they would do the heavy lifting. All those things that we learned that I guess are critical to the question of how do you practice a strategy? Because I agree with you. I mean,
Yes.
I think, and just I guess summarizing what you've said, I think Porter, not in those two books, which I think are very important, but I think the most important book was the non-book, the paper, the 1996 paper, the What is Strategy paper, which I'm sure had a lot of collaboration with you guys. But if you ask me,
Yeah, I mean, Mike was not very good at saying thank you, and so I worked with Mike for decades.
Yeah.
And there's only one time he said thank you, and it's in that What is Strategy paper. If you'll see, he thanks several of us.
Yeah.
At the bottom publicly, and so yes, I did have a lot to do with that paper, which I do think is one of the most important things that's ever been written on strategy. It would certainly.
This is like one of those classics, Wilson's and maybe some other guys who maybe wrote a paper that was better than their books. That paper, I think, is more important than the books. The books are very important. I mean, the comparative strategy and comparative advantage. So I would say, and I also know that you're behind that too. I also, I think in those books there was a lot of collaboration with the Monitor guys, and it was. I mean, you like soccer. It was like the Barcelona of the times, or the Real Madrid. I mean, the right guys were playing. But let's say that in what is a strategy, I think Porter, in a very cogent way, said a strategy is about being unique, and unique requires choice. So strategy is choice. I mean, that's kind of the summary of that. That changed my life. I watched Porter deliver a previous presentation to that paper in November '95. We were in the account team there, and after I saw those ideas, it never changed. I mean, I could never unsee that. Changed my life.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I even asked Porter, why? Because you know that in the paper he doesn't talking about uniqueness. He doesn't talk about DNAs. He doesn't really connect to biology. I asked him. I think maybe because of his academic prestige or whatever the things. I mean, because what happened over the next years was that. I mean, the purpose of a strategy, and it connects with biology. I mean, and I think Henderson had that insight before. Two identical firms can't coexist in the same market because one will eliminate the other. So you're supposed to be unique, and unique will demand choice. And now we'll get into the choice problem, which I think, Roger, you are the foremost thinker on that. I would add to that.
No, can I just
go ahead.
pick up on your biological point? Like it is absolutely true in biology, right? If you put two species in one enclosed ecosystem that essentially eat the same stuff, one will eventually kill the other and eliminate it, and it becomes a monoculture. If they eat different stuff, they can survive for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years happily together. And that, I think, is just a really important insight, and one of the things that I think evolved over time in my own practice of strategy. It was always there, but I just don't think of strategy as win-lose. It's win-win. What you want to do is convince a competitor to eat different food, right?
Exactly.
Go after a different set of customers than I'm doing. People on the outside may say they're in the same industry, but that's irrelevant. Their definition of industry doesn't matter a whit. What matters is I'm going to get these guys, and I'm going to serve them super well, and so the customers are better off. And these other customers who like something else, you're going to serve them super well, and we're both going to prosper. Like how else can you really explain Mercedes and BMW? Two friggin' German luxury car manufacturers competing kind of supposedly in the same industry, but they've been successful, both of them successful and profitable for decades, going on a century. Well, it's because certain kind of people actually like Mercedes and would never drive a BMW, and certain kind of people love BMW and would never buy a Mercedes, right?
Yeah.
So they figured out how to eat different food and coexist happily. And who's better off? Customers. If you really like the BMW kind of ideal, there you got it perfectly. If you love the Mercedes ideal, you got it perfectly. And so customers are better off. Shareholders of both companies have made billions. The world is a better place.
Exactly.
Because of choice. Because of choice to say, I'm not going to kill my competitor. I'm going to figure out how we coexist productively.
Right.
And that's biological.
Exactly. And you know, and obviously, I mean, Porter himself in his old example of Southwest showed how the original theory was limited, as he showed that, you know, the low cost player doesn't come through high volume, comes from high focus. I mean, you focus yourself, and that leads to cost advantage, which ensues. So I mean, all these things got reinvented with that fundamental idea. I know now. I didn't know. I mean, I suspected, but I didn't know that you were also behind that thinking. The what is strategy now? The integrated set of choices, because it's not one choice; it's a set of integrated choices. That, you know, I tell my clients, look, with 5 or 6 choices, you're almost combinatorially guaranteed that you will be unique. With one choice, I mean, it's not one choice. So it becomes the whole set of integrated.
Yeah, and this is, again, Mike is a genius in many fronts, but he was very early on that idea that if your strategy is based on one thing, right? One thing, you build the biggest polyethylene plant in the world and have the best scale economies, and then, you know, you'll win forever. Mike would say no. Somebody will look at that and say, wow, that's a nice way to make money. How's about I plop down a polyethylene plant right beside it?
Yeah. So
I have the same logistics costs, the same raw material costs, and I'll make it twice as big. Then you're gone. I mean, there's a great Latin American example of this when way back when it used to be thought that, you know, classic kind of photocopier paper or pad paper could only be made with softwood, which is pine, you know, because they have long fibers and it would fall apart if it was made from hardwood. And then some bright engineers figured out how to make it out of hardwood, and it turns out that the fastest growing kind of hardwood in the world is eucalyptus, grown in Latin America, but also Southeast Asia, but Latin America, right? And so the first people who put in eucalyptus mills in Latin America just made a ton of money because they were beating, because the cost was, at least the last time I studied, it was like $40-50 a ton, which is a really meaningful amount lower than northern softwood, because northern softwood, like in the Scandinavia and Canada and Russia, grows really slowly and is more expensive. But what happened?
Yeah, competition.
Latin America is covered with eucalyptus mills because that was the one thing they did, and everybody else said, well, I can do that too. I can find a bunch of eucalyptus forests and chop them down and mash them up and make pulp. Mike was early on saying, no. If you have an activity system, as you know from that article, you have an activity system where you do a whole bunch of things differently. Then your competitors will look at that and say, basically, life's too short.
Exactly.
Southwest, right?
Right.
You mean I have to sell all my planes, scrap my route schedule, scrap meals, start pissing off rather than supporting the travel agent. I got to do all of that just to have a chance of competing with them.
Just to tie you, that's the trial. I mean, the good thing of choice is that if the guy works really hard and gets to your DNA, he will get to your DNA 20 years after the fact, and without advantage, which is the critical word. For me, the advantage comes from the trade-offs you impose on your competitors by being yourself.
Yep. Yep.
It's
And again, that was Mike's. Again, and I'm not.
but let's Roger fast forward.
Trade-off.
We agree that I mean, I have the same views that you about the evolution of the ideas, and I think the how-to of a strategy, which you were working feverishly at Monitor, the cascade of choices was again your idea. Lots of those things. I've told you, and I don't think I even made an impression on you that the paper that you wrote that impressed me the most in your early years was Changing the Mind of the Corporation. It really.
My first HBR article in 1993.
1991, I think.
Is it 1991? I think it's 1993. But
Maybe,
we'll see.
maybe, yeah. But I read it because we were struggling with this. How do you get a country to have a conversation and do these things which we were not even able to do in companies? Can you imagine doing it in a country?
But you might. It's quite that paper that HBR article took a long while to get into print, and so it might have well been. You might have seen it in 1991 floating around inside Monitor, not yet published.
Okay. But the idea is the how-to of a strategy. How do you get to the what's? I always say, and I don't mean, I'm not interested in diminishing what Porter achieved. He's a genius. He wasn't really that interested in the how. How do you make this phenomenon happen? I think you.
No, he never has been. I mean, it is an interesting thing about him. Like he did that in Competitive Advantage of Nations. He did it in healthcare. Exactly. He just said, "Listen, essentially, you morons. This is how you got to how to do it. Just go do it." And everybody else would be like, "Hey, Mike, it's not quite that simple."
Yeah, it's
so I felt I could fill in that gap.
Yeah, no, it became a huge gap. I noticed early that you were onto something, and now we'll talk about your career when you left Monitor and went to the university and all those things. But just going back to that, let me just state the facts. I think that if Mike Porter came with the why, I mean, the what of a strategy is a set of choices. If you don't deliver that, you played with yourself and you didn't really do nothing in that important meeting you had. Then I think the play to win for me the brand, the idea of the play to win is the what for. I mean, if you're not winning, and winning does not necessarily mean that the others are losing, as you're right. But if you're not sure that you're playing to win, if you don't define victory well, then most likely you will end up playing with yourself, converging in the market, destroying value, and that's very important. I mean, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you're Canadian and you know a little bit more soccer than the rest of the Americans. It's very important in soccer. If you don't play to win, you will most likely lose. I mean, if you play, we say if you
be in your own end the whole time.
Exactly. If you think like the Argentinians,
if you find an opening and they'll score.
If you think like the Argentinians, you lose to the Argentinians. We used to say. So I think the what for, play to win, you reappeared in my radar screen with that book. And I think so now we have the what and the what for, and obviously you have been reflecting upon the how. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, and can I say, I mean, if you're interested in the background, like what motivated me to take the perspective I did, and it is cultural to a certain extent. So I am a Mennonite, and Mennonites are incredibly practical, to a fault, probably, as a people. And it's a little, for those of you who don't know Mennonites, I mean, Mennonites and Amish are kind of similar. We both came out of the Protestant Reformation in Europe, and the founders of the faith were Anabaptists. They rebaptized. They said you should only get baptized when you know what's happening. Because in those days you got baptized as a baby and you didn't know what was happening. So that's what they said, which made us very bad because that was considered a heresy to baptize somebody who had already been baptized. it was okay for a baby to be born a Mennonite and not be baptized until they were ready, but they were called rebaptizers, Anabaptists, and they were hunted down
I didn't know you.
killed, and they fled, and a whole bunch of them fled to North America in Pennsylvania under William Penn. But they were agrarian and rural, and part of the Mennonite thing was everything. You don't want anything fancy. You want things to be simple. You kind of work hard, but everything has to be practical. Anything that is a flourish over and above that is wasteful, and you shouldn't do it. So I grew up in this kind of culture of it's gotta be practical, it's gotta be useful. Something that isn't practical and useful does not deserve any time or attention.
Interesting, huh?
And so, in some sense, I think just naturally in my heart, when I saw competitive strategy saying you should be a cost leader or a differentiator, but then not really explaining practically, well, if you weren't, how could you get there? I think that was just a motivation. It
Great,
struck
huh? Great
me
story.
as that's not practical. That's not useful. It's not useful to tell somebody, essentially, like, grow taller, right? I can tell you, Alejandro, it would be better if you were 4 inches taller, and you would say, you're right. You're right. I'd be better at a bunch of sports, or I'd be a better
Exactly.
basketball player or whatever. Maybe not a better soccer player, but it would have little utility to you because you can't do anything to achieve that end. And so I think it was my very practical side that said, gee, if these executives are saying, I buy you, Mike, I want to be low cost differentiated, I want to make a unique set of choices to win, but I have no idea how.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
That I think was the cultural motivation for it, for what it's worth.
well, for me, we will talk now about the cascade. I think the Play to Win has this very interesting framework of cascading of choices, which you have pioneered and Monitor. There were some very interesting ideas. One wonders why Monitor, disappeared as in its original version, to be very nice to the people still working there. But the cascade of choices, this idea that choices cascaded, which I think is yours and is implicit in your Play to Win model, is very interesting. Obviously, I'm going to tell you that, and I already asserted that I don't like methodologies. I don't think that's a methodology. That's a philosophy. That's a way to think. Even with the cascade of choices, it certainly happens a lot to me with the canvases. I know you are close to Osterwalder, but it's easy. What I'm saying is easy to sleepwalk through any model without doing choices, without making choices. You repeated it 10 times, I repeated it 5 times, everybody has said it, but people do sleepwalk through frameworks, avoiding choice. So I want to reflect as to how do we, if the philosophical phenomenon of strategy requires choice, and just to, talk very simply, hard choice. We know that real choices are hard. How do you make them happen? Because I think that's where you came in, I think that's where Porter ended. I think that's where I come in after your steps and other people, and I think it's where the revolution is taking place.
Yeah. So again, I want to start out by affirming what you observe. So the single most common use of the choice cascade is out in the world, is for somebody to say, wow, that's cool, and take whatever they're doing now and fit it into the 5 boxes, and then call it a playing to win strategy. Exactly. So that's the most common form, right? Which is choiceless and not strategic. So that is a challenge. I use a variety of techniques, but one one technique is that I find helpful is to take the current set of choices they've made and get them to reflect on those choices to say, what outcomes are those choices producing for us? So, and often they don't think of them as choices, they just think of them as sort of what we do, and of course everybody does that, but I try to get them to say, well, it would appear that we have chosen to use only these distribution channels and not these others. And they'll say, well, that's what we've always done. I said, the fact that you've always done it doesn't mean it's not a choice. It's a choice. And notice that other people are using other distribution channels. So that's a choice. And it would appear that we play in kind of this price range between here and here. And look, other people play in these other price ranges. So we've made a choice to play in only the mid-range through this distribution channel, right? And we don't seem to have, kind of hardly anybody in the R&D department, and they don't actually spend much money. So we've chosen to not try to thing, and we don't advertise very much. So I try to highlight the fact that those are choices, and then try to create the connection in their mind to start saying, your outcomes today are a consequence of all the choices that you've made interacting with the competitive environment, right? And what I try to convince them of is that it is super unlikely that those outcomes are going to get any better unless you make a different set of choices, because last time I checked, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different outcome is the definition of insanity, and we're not insane. So what I try to do is get them motivated by identifying their choices and identifying the outcomes, right?
Roger, so
And then
no, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, and I was going to say, and then I often have them look at a competitor that they respect and say, okay, let's see what choices they've made. And of course, we don't know exactly precisely every little last choice, but there are a lot of them that are evident from the outside. Oh, they sell through that distribution channel. They have a huge advertising budget, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And say, okay, so now we know that we've made a set of choices that produce this set of outcomes. They've made a different set of choices that produce this set of outcomes. How's about we start contemplating what other choices that we could perhaps contemplate making that would produce different outcomes? And so that's the way I walk people through the.
I think, and again, I happen to have good memory. It's implicit in your. I remember something you produced 30 years ago. I guess out of that paper, it was the framework was called, in a way, changing the mind of the corporation, and you would start.
Yes.
First step would be reverse engineering what you're doing, understand what you're doing, which I think is very important. In my theory, I would be very careful, to use words like better and stuff like that, because that gets you back into the continuous improvement world, which took so many years to get out. But your idea that you would reverse engineer and you would understand that other competitors would do other choices, for example. But it's time that we dive into this. What has become evident is that the worst enemy of strategy is strategic planning, is planning. I wrote a book about it, published it in 2021. We'll talk about it. But you yourself made an HBR video, which is the most successful, most downloaded video, and it's called "A Plan Is Not a Strategy." So I guess we're right there in the same, coming from, obviously in my case, coming a lot from ideas I borrowed from you. But the worst enemy of a strategy, it's a goddamn plan. and a ritual and a strategic planning exercise, which
Yeah.
is what companies do,
Yeah.
most consultants sell, most universities prepare for,
Yes.
and so on and so forth.
Yes.
So why don't you
Yes. It is
talk
sad.
about it?
It is sad but true. Yeah. Well, it's sad but true. I mean, and you might ask, well, why? Well, part of it is the training. People are trained in business schools to be business bureaucrats.
Business
Right.
bureaucrats, yeah.
That's simple. And my wife often sort of says, Roger, you're mean about bureaucrats. I mean, and she's right. There's a utility for bureaucrats, right? They're not like bad people. But if you ask the question, where does the value in corporations come from? Does it come from their bureaucrats? I just don't think so. I think the bureaucracy in companies is often necessary to keep it on the straight and narrow, but somebody has to make a set of choices that guide what the bureaucrats do. And business schools do not teach that.
Yeah, exactly.
Simple as that. Business schools do not teach how to make an integrated set of choices that provide the guidance for everybody else in the organization. They give you a set of analytical techniques. If you want to analyze your customers, here's how you do a market test, and here's how big a sample size you need. Or if you're going to organize a plant, here's how you balance an assembly line. Like it's all sorts of individual tools, but they don't teach business. They teach sub-disciplines of business, and in particular tools in those sub-disciplines. And strategy doesn't teach what I think of as strategy.
Exactly, and it couldn't come from a plan, because it's the other way around us. I mean, I'm going to go back to it's not plan, do, review, which is that potentially useful idea maybe in a production line, taken to its level of incompetence. It's not plan, do, review. Is do, learn, and eventually, that's the rest of the process. Eventually, choose. What happens between that? Remember, going back to these old mantras that I was taught, that maybe came from you and your very interesting friends back then in the 90s. We were taught this idea that strategy was informed choice, timely action. You remember that mantra we had at Monitor. Informed choice, timely action.
Yes.
I liked it, but I always thought it was something big missing there. And the big missing, go back to your contribution, is how do you get to the informed choice, and how do you convert choice into action? The bête noire. The real problem is that. So I think going back to the plan is not a strategy. Then what is it? I mean, if a plan is not a strategy, what is it? It's a set of choices that give you uniqueness in the marketplace. Integrated choices, as you mentioned, considered together, they give you advantage. Advantage is converted in cash. All those things are part of that theory. The question is then, okay, how do make who in a corporation, who is a genius up there called the CEO, is a socialist view, is everybody, who in a corporation, and through which process gets to make those hard choices, and more importantly, how do they get framed, and how is that process? And that's where I came to the idea. Minsberg had said it before, obviously, but I'm more radical. That you learn from doing, eventually discover things. Those things produce dissonance. Dissonance eventually, like in scientific revolutions, give you a breakthrough, after which you're ready to, deliver the hard choice. So it's a process which I think it connects many of the things, and even of the, I guess, unfair criticisms that Porter had, in the Californian school vis-a-vis Christensen or stuff like that. Well, what do you think, Roger? I mean, I kind of, downloaded my whole thing. But...
Yeah. No, I've ended up working with various really interesting people over my life, and one was Chris Argyris, who I worked with for essentially kind of 11 years, from 87 to 98 when I left, and he really did impress on me this great importance in distinguishing between kind of theories, espoused theories and theories in use, and really helped me sort of solidify my views on it's what people actually do that matters, not the things that they talk about, it's what they do. And the question Chris posed during his entire academic career was, what mindset do you have to have
Exactly.
that would cause you to learn from what you've done rather than not? And so it's been a big focus of mine to say, yeah, my practical side says it's about what you do, not what you say. You can say all sorts of flowery, we ain't gonna be the best, blah, 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 blah. No, our what are you doing? And then to help people reflect on the results of what they're doing in a way that causes them to learn. Because again, people often say, oh, practice makes perfect. It doesn't, right? It absolutely doesn't. You can go to the driving range and hit 5,000 golf balls and be worse at the end of it than you were at the start, because you've perfectly grooved and got muscle memory on a slice, let's say, or a hook. And so now your swing is totally grooved to slice it. Hitting 5,000 balls at a driving range is only good for you if you say, okay, here's my stance, here's my swing, and I'm going to try and make it go that way. It didn't.
Exactly.
What about my stance, my swing, my pace? What made that happen? Now, sadly, right, for many things in life, it's hard to do that yourself, right? Like I could do that, and I could never figure out what causes me to slice. But if I had really good golf pro standing there, you'd say, Roger, you're trailing. The club head is trailing too much, and that's why you're slicing. Or Roger, you don't realize it, but you have a slice stance, right? That's a slice stance. So it's going exactly where it should be going, not where you want it to go, but where it should be going based on what you. So often, people. What I try to do with people is try to get them the help they need to learn, because if they can learn, the sky's the limit, right? It literally is the limit. And I try to be somewhat scientific about it to say, you actually have to say in advance what the decisions you're making, what you hope they will produce. Because if you don't, you have no comparison.
Exactly.
Right? Whatever happened, I guess, must have been right. No, I was trying to grow the business 10% and it grew 5%. And so the efforts that were designed for 10 got me 5. What did I not see about what I was doing, the competitive environment, whatever, that caused the 10 to be 5? And therefore, what can I do to?
And look at that, Roger. The importance of learning and discovery. Which for me is essential to strategy as it is choice. Learning, which for me is different than training or whatever. Learning has always this identity dimension that you talk. I mean, you can only learn as a company really from things you did in your own clash with the marketplace. When you're learning from others, you may be copying, and you're probably converging, and you're probably in the wrong path. So that I came to the conclusion that as you pointed out, you start doing, you reflect upon doing, you eventually see, as you will always see, unintended outcomes. When you see them, they turn into emergent results. In the process of emerging, they question fundamental paradigms, which are very painful to overcome, that if you eventually do overcome, get you ready to make a hard choice. I've never seen anybody made a hard choice without breaking a paradigm, never in my life. People don't make hard choices because of recommendations.
Right. No, I think you're absolutely right, and you know, I think that I often think of my job as providing a helping, guiding hand through that process, because it can be very damaging, crushing. Or like when you say, I'm going to invest $100 million because I think this is going to happen, and then it just doesn't. They need somebody to say, okay, it didn't happen the way we wanted. What did we learn, right? Because there's that, you know, what about our theory can we modify based on that happening that we would have been incapable of modifying without that happening, right? So that bad thing that happened,
Yeah.
there is a silver lining. There is a good thing, but often, I mean, the individual who's experienced that, if they're experiencing it kind of alone, it will feel too crushing to look really carefully at it for the learnings out of it. And so I think people like you and I can really help people, but you have to be really, in my experience and opinion, have to be really empathetic, because if it comes across as, you moron, how the hell did you ever imagine that $100 million we're going to do that, right? They will not learn, and they will reject you. And I also think, like, you know, I love Kuhn. I love The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It's one of the most impactful books I've ever read. What I try to help people understand is that is life, right? Life does not come equipped with perfect theories. It comes equipped with the best idea we got now, which is going to be found wanting in due course, right? And so, right, don't think of, if only you could have been perfect, as some kind of useful goal.
You're touching upon, you know, fundamental part of I guess, I mean, as I said, I'm not going to deny that I've been inspired by you in many ways, but that Kuhnian idea that, you know, which actually Drucker brought into the business world, that, you know, more than I say, a strategy is not a plan, as you said. What is, for me, is what you do, is how you're organized and how you think, and that thinking is embodies a theory of the business. And what you do is you go displacing one theory from other that is better suited for explaining the phenomenon. The phenomenon is the cash and the competition and value and advantage. And changing theories, as it is in science, is very hard. And it requires breakthrough, and it requires dissonance, and that's, for me, the emergent process towards a strategy that I propose, that comes, you know, inspired by many of your ideas. I actually, kind of synthesize my theory in 8 principles, 3 of which are, you know, play to win. You know, you should play to win, and should make very, very sure that you're playing to win, not to kill the other, not to look nice, not to look sexy or modern, to win. What is winning? Another one is strategy is choice, right from the, you know, from the guru. But then strategy is learning, and strategy is breakthrough at the same level of importance, which help you convert learning into choice, and noise into learning. So I guess that's it. And I mean, don't deny. I mean, in my case, it's very easy to point my intellectual origins. And there's this dimension of Kuhnian. There's a Kuhnian phenomenon at the client, at the company level, and obviously in the whole theory of strategy, there's been a Kuhnian evolution that has supported you and others, and you know, and I think we do. I mean, if Hamel asked today if there is a theory of strategy, I would wholeheartedly answer that there is. There's never a final theory, but there is a theory of the what and the how.
Yeah. No, I think that's right, and I mean, to me, the biggest challenge, though, in strategies, there is a theory of strategy, but there is a stronger practice of planning, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
You know, it dominates strategy dramatically. Like for every, if you and I could categorize something as a really choiceful strategy or not, right? If you ask the question, what is the frequency of observation of a choiceful strategy versus a plan? It might be 1%.
Oh, yeah.
Like 99 plans for every one choiceful strategy that you or I would just see if we were more like equity analysts and we spend all of our life just analyzing people's annual reports and blah 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 blah. If that's what we did for a living with this lens, I think it would be a 99-to-1 ratio, or at best 95-to-5.
That's incredible. That when we had lunch, you said something that left me thinking for a while, for a long time. You said that you think strategy is a little bit of a lost art, and you said, along with that, obviously, and I want you to dwell on that for a while, because I want to ping pong this last part of the podcast. You also said that I agree with it, that most of the big consultancy no longer practice strategy, that the system of management on Wall Street doesn't allow, that in the US you perceive that a lot of the big companies are not really practicing strategy. I pushed back and said that what I see in Latin America is a renaissance and an emergence of strategy, a lot of people wanting to practice. Maybe I'm deceiving myself. But why you talk a little bit about that? Because I actually see that now strategy is leaving the corporate room, leaving the corporate world, and invading all spaces of reality. I mean, people are reading your book for playing to win in life. Sport. I know you advise sports associations. I mean, you helped a country win the Olympics. I mean, I am writing a book about my country. I know you follow your country. I mean, in spite of living in the US, you're a Canadian and you follow your country and want Canada to. So I mean, so I have a tension with this. I mean, I think, by the way, I mean, you're probably aware, but I'm sure you're not aware of the level of followership you have in Latin America beyond simple corporations.
Yeah. No, and I probably have it might be an overly romantic view of Latin America. I love working with Latin American companies. I do. I'll be heading to both Chile and Peru in March to work with two of them. Now I probably have to be careful that it's a sample selection problem, right? Which is that the companies that reach out to me from Latin America are ones who care about strategy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have reached out to me in the first place. So I haven't. But I do. It feels to me as though the Latin American companies that I work with, and maybe because lots of them have large family ownership, they may be public company, but there's a big block of family ownership, that they can take a longer perspective. It's not just this quarter. There isn't an insane Wall Street, and I used to say, like, for the entire sweep of the 20th century, one of America's greatest advantages over every other country in the world, and it wasn't even close, was its capital market. It had the best capital market for growing businesses kind of in the world, and it wasn't even close. Even the UK or Japan, not even close. I now think that the US capital markets are a substantial detriment to its companies in being globally competitive. It's gotten so bad. So I do get the sense when I'm in Latin America that there are these companies that say two things. One is, this is going to take a while, but if we do this, it's going to be worthwhile, and man, we can accomplish a lot. Like, it's not we're going to try and get one more point of market share. It's we're going to grow this market spectacularly and get 80 share points out of it. There are these views that there's much more strategic competitive mobility. You can change your outcomes and they're less daunted by the notion that it's going to take a while. So there's big goals that'll take a while, and I see a lot less of that in the U.S.
Right, as you talk, I can't help but reminisce. It's a huge paradox. When we work in Monitor, people in Latin America would tell us that strategy was something for the gringos, for the Americans, that Latin Americans couldn't practice strategy. Now you're telling me, look, because of their family ownership, keeping a strategic continuity, actually Latin Americans could practice strategy more effective than interesting. I mean, what a turning world.
Yeah, how things change.
Incredible, huh?
But you can see how like there's just a complex interrelationship of institutions that produce the fabric of your economy, and I just think kind of Wall Street has gone in a direction. Now, a lot of people would say, Roger, what you said is just plain wrong, because the best growth
venture
capital
capital
in the world is based in San Francisco, and it is the venture world. And I've written about that. And I've said there's East Coast capital, because the big money managers, the big pension funds are dramatically East Coast view, and West Coast capital. East Coast capital has gotten into this terrible situation of saying to companies, we want you to grow faster than the economy, faster than your industry. We want you to grow top line or bottom line faster than top line, but don't take any risk.
Incredible. Yeah.
And that's an impossibility, right?
Yeah.
And so it leads to bad things. And there's West Coast capital that says, we don't care much in the short term about profits or whatever, but you have to grow like crazy.
Interesting, yeah.
Grow like crazy. And so that grow like crazy capital is an exception to what I've said.
Yeah, I was going to point that out, that venture capital was an advantage.
It is a small pool of capital. It's a small pool of capital. That is tiny compared to
and you think, do you think that East Coast capital disease is being driven by private equity, asset management, and stuff like that?
Actually not. Like I do think the activist hedge funds are hyenas, a scourge on society. I wish they would all, fall into a big hole and disappear. But they are small compared to BlackRock, kind of
institutions.
New York State Common Retirement Thrift. That's where the money is, and those are a bunch of fiduciaries who have no idea how companies grow and why they.
So interestingly, by promoting convergence and demanding growth, they are destroying value.
Yes. Plus, there's this whole horizontal kind of concentration problem, right? Like, if P&G went to their big holders, BlackRock, Fidelity, etc., and said, we've got an idea, and it's an idea for a transformational diaper product, absolutely transformational. It's going to cost us $5 billion of investment over the next 5 years, but if we accomplish that, we can take 25 share points from Kimberly-Clark, and be, rather than 50-50, we'll be 75-25, and we will absolutely dominate. What do you think? The reaction of the big capital holders would be, oh, I don't know about that. There's that, but they own as much Kimberly-Clark, because they own the market. They own as much Kimberly-Clark as they own P&G. And so if P&G wipes out Kimberly-Clark, they make a bunch of money on their P&G stock and lose a bunch of money on their Kimberly-Clark stock, and they're too chicken to say we're going to X out of our Kimberly-Clark position in order to watch this strategy happen, because then if Kimberly-Clark actually does well, then the people who've given them their capital will say, why did you get out of Kimberly-Clark? So what they'd rather have is Procter & Gamble not do that, right? So there are all sorts
You're right. I hadn't seen it that way, and maybe you're right. I mean, that level of conversation I've never faced in in Colombia. We need to finish, and I'm going to finish teasing you about, picking your brain about a couple of things. I mean, we know that
Sure.
strategy is going to change consulting, and it's going to change everything. You've already opened that conversation. AI and strategy. I mean, will AI kill strategy, kill consultants, kill strategies? How do you envision AI and strategy?
Well, a couple things. Like AI will be disruptive to the MBB kind of world, McKinsey, Bain, BCG, the big giant pyramids with lots of people really doing routine things at the bottom. I mean, it already has, in that they all have big operations in India that do things at low costs and feed analyses back. Those operations are going to be decimated and will simply be replaced by AI. So there will be a giant impact. Now, the question of will AI do strategy for a company? The answer is, in my view, no. And the reason is you've just got to think, and when people say AI these days, what they actually are referring to is LLM-based AI, large language model-based AI. That's where all the excitement is, and that's what people are. Is ChatGPT going to kind of destroy this industry of that? What people have to understand is the way a large language model works, right? And the way a large language model works, what is the purpose of that large body of language? Well, it's to provide an answer to the question, what happens most frequently in this situation? So AI is a median, actually mode
Machine, yeah.
seeking device, right? That's what it does. It goes out into the world, and faster than Alejandro could do by 1,000,000 times, like literally 1,000,000 times faster than you could ever do, figure out the mode of something.
Yeah.
Right? And then it gives you that and says, here's the essentially most common answer to your problem, which by the definition of the LLM is the best answer. So large language models just don't aim to find the tip of the right tail of the distribution. They don't even know how to do that, right? That's not the algorithm. That's you can't say to LLM, come up with the most creative kind of way to do this ever imagined. They will bring you back something that's modal. So planning will be wiped out. The people involved in planning will be wiped out by AI, like just totally wiped out. But if you're actually good at strategy, all that will happen is that lots of the things you would like to know in order to inform your ways of thinking, you can get faster and cheaper. So it'll make you more cost-effective person in helping a client find the proverbial right tip of the right tail of the distribution of strategy choice. So it's something to really worry about, because lots of jobs, massive numbers of jobs are going to go, but the practice of strategy.
Very interesting. I'm glad. I think we agree. Yeah, I hadn't seen it in the way that the way the paella is cooked in LLMs condense you to averaging, linear thinking, normal thinking, median thinking, which is never been the secret of strategy. But I hadn't really seen that it may help our cause in the sense that it's going to wipe out planning bureaucracies, which populate and dominate.
Yes.
And
a
force
of just type in AI, get us a plan.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's actually okay. The other thing that I wanted to touch, and I always see all of the enemies of real strategy. The last enemy is this new modern enemy that says that strategy is irrelevant, culture is everything, and they cite Drucker. And I know for a fact you told me that Drucker didn't say that. The famous culture.
It's the Drucker. It's the Drucker Center archivists. So it isn't even me. It's they because this is so often attributed to him. They spent an enormous amount of time doing this search through everything he's ever written, every speech he ever gave. Nowhere.
Great. Yeah, I always citing that for me. Roger, I want to finish and I want to give you the last words, saying something for you to close this podcast. Is that for some time, a lot of people said that Christensen was and I like a lot of his ideas, but the disruptive, the innovator's dilemma framework killed everything before that. They used to say that there was this contradiction between Porter and Christensen, that Porter was very static, and that, we were in the California era and we needed a different framework. I'm so glad that, I always said that if you needed two theories to explain the same phenomenon, you're long on two theories. They're both bad. I think there's only one theory of strategy. I think that theory of strategy is what we've been discussing, and you are one of the biggest contributors. And I love when I see, for example, Play to Win or my framework of emergent strategy embraced by startups. You can't imagine. I never thought of startups while writing my book. I never thought of them because they've never been my clients. And they embraced, and when I go and talk to them, I see them practicing Play to Win. So I think Porter's idea is more alive than ever through those things, and this actually I think is a big synthesis. So why don't you just I guess wrap up, giving me your vision for strategy. You've been writing in a very disciplined way, a lot of ideas and insights branded by the same overarching idea of Play to Win, which I understand is very successful. You even told me that you would reconsider writing a book with the levels of audience and engagement you have now through your medium. So I guess why don't you just give us a vision? I mean, people wanna see what Roger Martin is thinking.
Sure.
And I remain.
Sure. Though I will step back on Clay and Mike. Clay might be the nicest person I've ever met. He just is such a great guy, and I think he made an important contribution. I think of it as just different. You got to pay attention to this cycle of disruption. It wasn't strategy, and he never, and he tried to grow a firm that was like Monitor, but it never really did. InnoSight, which is a good firm, but it got sold. So it was just different. So for people to say, well, Clay can surpass Mike or something, they did different things. But the other thing to reflect on is it is the passing of an era. As you may or may not know, Mike is dying of Alzheimer's, and so we'll have a world. Unfortunately, we'll soon have a world without either Clay, who, as you know, passed away, and Mike, and it's a generation that's gone. We had Drucker, March, arduous, disappear, and now it's a next younger generation. So it's sad to see them go. But what do I think about for strategy going forward? As you know, I've written a whole lot on design and innovation, and about strategy being a kind of an art, not a science. And I think the coming of AI is going to further highlight the degree to which the strategy is a creative, artistic act, and I think kind of understanding how to nurture that, how to educate people in that, because they aren't. They're being, people go to business schools, great business schools like my alma mater, Harvard Business School, and they aren't taught to be creative strategists. They are taught the opposite, and that to me is a very sad thing. And so somehow we're going to have to try and inculcate the practice of creativity in strategy, and a bunch of that is linked to what you do and talk about, Alejandro. It's how do the creative people, do they maintain and build their creativity? Doing. The answer is doing. They don't theorize. They do learn. That spurs, hey man, we could maybe do it this way. That didn't work because this is what happened when I did it. Ooh, but maybe this other way, right? So I think we have to nurture that, and you know, I used to do a lot of work with Patrick Whitney, who's a great dean of the design school at IIT, and he used to complain that the practice of design education was too theoretical. So to that side, and it is true. You go to design school, do a 2-year whatever master's of design or 4-year undergrad, and all you do is one task after another. They say design this, design that, design this. You're just doing. Patrick Whitney said there's not enough theory, but you get a hell of a lot of practice, right? And I talked to Joe Gebbia, you know, the co-founder of what do we call it, Airbnb, and he was a RISD grad, Rhode Island School of Design, and I asked him what was good about it, and he said, well, we just got practice over and over again on designing something, and that gave me great practice at it. I think what we've got to do is bring practice more clearly into the education in strategy, but not go so far of design of being theoretical. It's to say, how could we build the theory, but make it rooted more in practice, and that's the only way we're going to get the creativity we need in strategy.
Thanks, Roger. I think, I mean, we could have gone for hours, and maybe we'll do another one. People will love hearing from you directly to talking to a Latin American audience. I'm sure. I know for a fact. I'll share the feedback. They certainly follow you in your different platforms. I thank you very much for being here. I'm so grateful, Roger, that you took the time to share with me these ideas, and to be very, very candid about your views. I enjoyed it very much. I think we need to cut it short. There's so many things we could talk about. I get this takeaway from your last words. I mean, it goes back to the old maxim that if you don't want to be replaced by a computer, don't act like one. That we will be, we will need more thinkers, more doers, and more organizational designers, and less planners, less paper feeders, less, and I think that all helps our cause. So I thank you very much, Roger. I enjoyed this. You can't imagine how much I enjoyed this, and we'll be back one of these days.
Well, terrific. It was very enjoyable, and I look forward to having the podcast up. I will distribute it as broadly as I can.
Great, Roger. Thanks a lot.
Not at all. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.